Have you ever felt like you've been taken for granted over and over, but never quite knew how to say enough? How do you stand up for yourself when the person who's hurting you is your family? It started like any other night, a usual quiet evening at home. My legs were aching from a long day at work, the kind where the clock seemed to drag and all you want is to collapse onto your couch and shut the world out. That's what I did, slumping onto the couch with my phone in hand, mindlessly scrolling through posts, trying to numb myself. But then, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar message from Uncle Jack. He's not much of a texter, calls for birthdays and holidays, sure, but never random messages. I stared at the screen for a moment before swiping it open. His message read simply, "You need to see this, Quinn. I'm sorry." Sorry? My stomach flipped at the word, but curiosity took over. I tapped the video link, my fingers suddenly shaking. The screen lit up, and there she was, Ava, my younger sister. She was lounging in a lawn chair in Mom and Dad's backyard, that place I'd spent so many afternoons under the crooked oak tree. The one with the faded patio table, where we'd all sit together, laughing or pretending we could. Ava's sitting there, a drink in hand, the ice clinking, her grin stretched wide, the same smug smile she wore whenever she knew she was winning something. "Come on," she said, her voice sharp, performing for the camera. "Quinn's too dumb to ever kick me out. She just lets me stay here, rent-free like an idiot." The laughter in the background was unmistakable. I heard my cousin Jake's loud cackle, Lindsay's high-pitched giggle, and even Dad's low, almost amused chuckle. My chest tightened. I hit replay, and again. The words sliced deeper each time. I make way more than she even knows. But why waste my money when my idiot sister lets me live for free? I couldn't breathe. The phone felt like it was burning in my hand. I replayed it for the third time, maybe the fourth. Each time, it hit harder. 3 years. 3 years I'd opened my home to her, believing her story. A broken relationship, no place to live, crying on the phone, saying she just needed a little time. I believed it. I opened my doors and told her to stay as long as she needed. No rent, no bills, just a roof over her head. And she'd been playing me. This wasn't a poor, struggling sister anymore. This was a smug, entitled girl laughing about how she had me wrapped around her finger. I couldn't shake it. Her voice mocked me, calling me stupid. My reality tilted. I wasn't tired anymore. I wasn't numb. I was awake, burning with something colder than anger. The rage would come later. But right now, I was eerily calm. The phone buzzed again. Uncle Jack had messaged. "I wasn't sure if I should send this, but you needed to know." I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the keys. Old me, the one who always let things slide, would have picked up the phone and confronted Ava, asked her why she'd done it, maybe excuse for her behavior, maybe thought she was drunk or didn't mean it. Old me would have done all the things that let her keep walking all over me, but not anymore. Not today. I typed a simple message. "Thank you. Don't say anything to her. I'll handle it." I hit send. The screen went dark, but my mind was already racing. I had to confront her, but this time, I wouldn't be the fool. Not anymore. I leaned back into the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. It was silent now, except for the occasional creak of the house settling around me. The quiet felt like the calm before a storm. I wasn't mad, not yet. But something was shifting, deep inside. And Sarah had no idea what was coming. I barely slept that night, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smug grin on Ava's face and heard her mocking words. Too dumb to ever kick me out. My stomach churned. I kept thinking back to the moment she moved in, how she'd come to me, crying, desperate, swearing she just needed a little time to get back on her feet. I didn't hesitate. I let her in. But now the picture was clearer. She didn't need help. She just wanted to keep the good times rolling, using me as her doormat. Free rent, free food, free everything. And I, being the sucker I was, had let it all slide. For 3 damn years. It was 6 a.m. when I finally got up, made my coffee, and started the morning routine. But I was different now. The air felt heavier and thicker, like I could almost taste the tension hanging in the room. I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. Ava stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep, stretching dramatically, humming some song I didn't recognize. She was blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I made sure to keep my face neutral as I sipped my coffee, watching her. She grabbed my oat milk without a second thought and poured herself some coffee, slumping into one of the chairs like she owned the place. She barely looked up from her phone as she started to scroll through it. I set my mug down carefully, watching her. "So," I said, keeping my voice casual, "what's your plan this month?" She glanced up at me with a frown. "What do you mean?" "Well," I shrugged, keeping it light. "You've been here a while now. I figured you might be thinking about your next steps. Looking for a new place, maybe?" Her face twisted into a dramatic groan. "Ugh, Quinn, I have so much on my plate right now. Moving is the last thing I need to deal with. Plus, it's so expensive." I fought the urge to laugh. The irony of it all. She could afford anything. I knew that now, but I played it cool, keeping my voice even. "I get that, but I was thinking maybe it's time for some changes around here." Ava barely looked up from her phone, tapping away as if she hadn't heard me. "What kind of changes?" I let the silence stretch between us, just enough to make her look up, confused. I waited, watching her, until the tiniest flicker of tension crossed her face. Then I said it, casually as ever. "Well, starting next month, I think it makes sense for you to start paying rent." Her eyes flickered, then narrowed as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Wait, are you serious?" I tilted my head, locking eyes with her. "Yeah, you've been here 3 years, Ava. Rent-free. I figured it was time." She scoffed, leaning back in her chair and shaking her head like I was the one being ridiculous. "Come on, Quinn. We're family. You expect me to pay rent?" I didn't flinch, not even a little. I just kept my gaze steady, my voice calm. "Yes." The word landed like a slap in the face, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of disbelief cross her expression. Then she went into damage control mode, scoffing again, though her voice was strained this time. "Quinn, you're going to do this to me after everything? After all the support I've given you?" I didn't flinch. "Everything I've given you," I corrected her, my voice sharp. "I've let you live here for 3 years, Ava. No rent, no bills. I thought maybe it was time you chipped in." She crossed her arms, her face twisting between amusement and disbelief. "We're family. You can't seriously expect me to pay rent like some random tenant." I took a slow sip of my coffee, my mind quiet, but my resolve solidifying. "Actually, yes. You're living here like a tenant. Why shouldn't you pay like one?" For a moment she looked stunned, like she didn't know how to react. But then, she did what she always did. Tried to turn the situation around, play the emotional card. I joke around a lot. Maybe I don't always show it, but I appreciate you, okay? I've just been going through a lot lately." I raised an eyebrow, giving her nothing. "A lot?" She nodded, rubbing her temples like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "Work stress, personal stuff, life. I don't talk about it much because I don't want to burden you with it." I let her words hang in the air, giving her enough space to think she had me on the hook. Then, after a long pause, I responded lightly, "So you have the money then?" She blinked, her voice faltering. "What?" I pointed out gently. "You said it was life stress, not financial. So paying rent shouldn't be an issue, right?" Her face twisted for a moment, processing what I was saying before she waved her hand dismissively. "Well, technically, yeah, I could pay it." She hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "But why should I? You don't even need the money, Quinn." That was the line that broke it all open. The audacity. She wasn't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about financial hardship. It was about her thinking I owed her this, thinking she could just keep taking it without giving anything in return. I smiled a little, just the faintest curl of my lips. "It's not about whether I need it, Ava. It's about fairness." She rolled her eyes, letting out a sarcastic laugh. "Fairness? Are you serious right now?" I didn't even blink. "Yes." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly expecting me to back down, to crack, but I didn't. Her frustration was palpable, but I was steady. "I'm giving you a heads up," I said, my voice calm. "Plenty of time to get your finances in order before next month." She stared at me, mouth slightly open, trying to process everything. Then, as if to gather her last bit of dignity, she muttered, "Wow, I just wasn't expecting you to pull something like this." I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch on. Then I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, stunned. The next few days passed in a tense silence. Ava was strangely absent, spending most of her time in her room, only slipping out to grab food or drink when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew she was processing everything, probably trying to figure out how to twist it all back on me, but I was ready. I'd let her get away with everything for too long. This was different. She had no idea how serious I was. I stayed calm, letting the discomfort simmer, the air thick with unspoken tension. She avoided me, her footsteps lighter when she passed by, and her presence in the house felt more like an unwelcome guest than a sister. Then, Friday night, she stormed into the living room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, her face a mixture of frustration and desperation. The door slammed behind her, rattling the frames. She stopped in the middle of the room, arms crossed, glaring at me. "So," she started, her voice tight, "are you serious about this rent thing?" I looked up from the book I was reading, not at all surprised by her sudden confrontation. I had been expecting it. I closed the book slowly, setting it aside, and met her gaze. "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" Ava scoffed, pacing back and forth in front of me, clearly agitated. "I just don't get why you're doing this now, after 3 years. It makes no sense." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "It makes perfect sense, Ava. You have a job, you make good money. There's no reason you shouldn't be contributing." Her face twisted, a mix of disbelief and irritation. "We're family, Quinn. Family helps each other. You're going to treat me like some random tenant?" I didn't flinch. "You've been living here like a tenant, Ava. No rent, no bills, so why shouldn't you pay like one?" She stopped pacing, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way to flip the situation back on me, but she didn't have the upper hand anymore. I'd taken that from her. She took a deep breath, and then, as if she had rehearsed it, softened her voice. "Look, I know I joke around a lot. Maybe I don't always show it, but I appreciate you, okay? I've just been going through a lot lately." She paused, rubbing her temples again, like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "Work stress. Personal stuff, you know, life. I don't talk about it much because I don't want to burden you." I watched her, my face calm, giving nothing away. "A lot?" She nodded, eyes wide, like she was expecting me to crack. "Yeah, a lot." I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice even. "So you have the money then?" She blinked, thrown off guard. "What?" I tilted my head. "You said it was life stress, not financial. So paying rent shouldn't be an issue, right?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Her eyes flickered, and I could almost see her mentally scrambling for something to say. "Well, technically, yeah," she admitted reluctantly. "I could pay it? But why should I? You don't even need the money." The words hit me hard, and I could feel the anger bubbling up under the surface. But I didn't let it show. I just shook my head slightly, the smile on my lips barely there. "It's not about whether I need it, Ava. It's about fairness." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Fairness? Are you serious right now?" "I am," I said, my voice still steady, unwavering. "For 3 years, I've done everything for you. I let you stay here, rent-free, without even asking for anything in return. And now, when I ask you for something, just a little fairness, you act like I'm the unreasonable one." Her face twisted in frustration. I could see the anger building behind her eyes, but she wasn't used to this, not used to me standing my ground. She crossed her arms and glared at me. "I'm giving you a heads up, Ava," I continued, my tone almost casual. "You've got plenty of time to get your finances in order before next month." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes darted around, clearly processing everything. Then she muttered, almost to herself, "I can't believe you're doing this to me." I didn't bite. I just smiled lightly. It's not a big deal, Ava. I'm just asking for what's reasonable. You've had enough time. You've got a job. You're not struggling like you said you were. So, it's time to pay your share. She let out a breath, clearly trying to figure out how to get out of it. She opened her mouth, probably to argue again, but I cut her off. We both know what's going on here. So either you start paying rent, or you'll have to find a new place. She looked at me, her nostrils flaring, trying to find a way to deflect. You can't be serious. I leaned back in my chair, my posture casual but firm. I am. You've got two options. Start paying, or move out. Her jaw tightened, and for a split second I saw a crack in her mask. She looked like she was about to say something, but instead, she just scoffed and turned on her heel, walking away. I can't believe you're doing this, she muttered under her breath as she left the room. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. I'd given her a chance to do the right thing, and now the ball was in her court. I didn't know how she'd react, but I was ready. No more pretending, no more excuses. I was done being the fool. The days following my ultimatum were a strange, tense quiet. Ava continued to avoid me, slipping in and out of the house like a shadow. She used to be everywhere, plopped on the couch, snacking through my groceries, hijacking my Netflix account for her late-night binges. But now, she seemed to disappear when I was around, creeping around in the early mornings or late nights when I wasn't awake to catch her. It was like she was biding her time, waiting for me to cave, to soften, to go back to being the sister who always said, yes. She thought I'd back down. She thought this was just another one of my phases. But she was wrong. By Thursday afternoon, I'd already drafted the lease agreement in my head and knew the amount and the terms. I'd looked up comparable rents in the area and knew exactly what the going rate was. I wasn't going to back off, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me back into the same corner I'd been in for 3 years. When the email arrived in her inbox that evening, I knew things were about to get real. I wasn't playing around anymore. Around 9 p.m., I heard Ava's footsteps in the hallway, quick, anxious. I'd been waiting for this moment. I could almost feel her heart racing as she stared at the email on her phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just done. Sure enough, she stormed into the kitchen, holding her phone out like it was a weapon, her face contorted in disbelief. "Quinn, what the hell is this?" she snapped, her voice sharp. I looked up from the counter, not flinching. "What's the problem, Ava?" She thrust the phone at me, her finger pointing at the screen. "You did it, huh? You went and formalized everything. This says my first rent payment is due today. You've gone and hired a rental management company?" I took the phone from her, glancing over the email like it was the most casual thing in the world. The lease agreement was neatly laid out, and the terms were clear. I could tell she was furious, but there was something else in her eyes. Fear. "Yeah," I said coolly, handing the phone back. "I figured since you weren't taking this seriously, I should make it official. I thought you might want everything in writing." Her mouth fell open as she read through the document again, probably hoping that it would disappear, that I was bluffing. She wasn't used to me being so cold, so resolute. She was used to me being the sister who would fold, who would soften, who would give in. She looked at me, eyes wide, almost pleading. "200? Are you out of your mind?" she exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch. "You're seriously asking me for this much money?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, my arms folded, my expression calm. I knew exactly what she was doing, throwing a tantrum, trying to make me feel guilty, trying to get me to back down. But this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, and about stopping the cycle she'd put me through. "You've been here for 3 years, I said slowly, my voice measured, living rent-free. Free food, free rent, free utilities, and you think $200 is insane? In this area, it's actually below market rate." She stepped back, her face twisting in disbelief, then anger. She clenched her jaw, trying to hold herself together. "I can't believe you're doing this," she muttered. "I've done so much for you." I raised an eyebrow, not letting the sting of her words get to me. "What have you done for me, Ava? You've been living off of me for 3 years, taking advantage of my kindness. I don't owe you for that." Her chest rose and fell as she took a few shaky breaths, looking at me like she was searching for some sign of weakness, something that would tell her this was just a bad joke, but there was nothing. I wasn't joking. She tried to gather her thoughts, looking everywhere but at me, like the words she wanted to say couldn't come fast enough. You can't just throw me out. You're my sister, Quinn. We're family. We are family, I said, the words coming out crisp and deliberate. But that doesn't mean I should let you walk all over me. You've been living here like a tenant, so it's time to pay up. Her face turned red with frustration. I could see the wheels turning, trying to think of a way to manipulate me back into her favor, but I wasn't going to let it happen. Not this time. You think you can just treat me like this? She hissed, her voice almost breaking. After everything I've been through? I stepped closer, my voice steady but firm. I'm not treating you any differently than I always have. I've let you stay here for free. I've been more than patient, but you're not a guest, Ava. You're a tenant now, and tenants pay rent. Her mouth worked for a moment, no words coming out. The realization of what I was doing, what I was asking her to do, was starting to hit her. She had no way out, no excuse left to fall back on. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke, her voice softer now, almost desperate. I don't have the money, Quinn, I don't. You're asking too much. I took a step back, crossing my arms over my chest. You've had 3 years to figure things out. And besides, I know you have the money. I heard you on the phone last week, bragging about buying VIP tickets to that concert next month. Her face drained of color, the last of her defenses crumbling. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to form a coherent argument. I didn't need her excuses anymore. I'd heard enough. You've got 2 options, I said, my voice colder now, the finality of it clear. You can pay rent starting next month, or you can move out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and anger. For a moment, I thought she might explode, but then the anger seemed to fade, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Regret? Maybe a mix of both. You'd do that to me, huh? She said, almost under her breath. You'd kick me out? I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her, steady and unmoving. If you don't want to pay, that's your choice, but you'll be out. She stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, and then, as if she had no more fight left in her, she turned and walked away, the door slamming behind her. It was over. I'd said what needed to be said. And now there was no turning back. The silence in the house was suffocating. Ava didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the one after that. I could feel her presence in the house even when she wasn't physically there, like the air was still thick with her avoidance. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock on the door, I was waiting for her to come back, to face the consequences of what had happened. But she didn't. For the first time in 3 years, the house felt still, peaceful. The constant tension, the little annoyances, gone. But at the same time, something inside me was unsettled. I had done what needed to be done, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Ava might not understand. Or maybe she didn't care. I went about my days as usual, not expecting her to leave, but bracing myself for the fallout. I thought she might show up at the door, angry, demanding to know why I was doing this. Maybe she would try to plead her case again. But no. She just stayed away, like she was hiding, hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself on its own. By the 4th day, I had my answer. It was a late night when the front door finally opened, a faint click of the lock turning in the dark. I was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, watching a show I hadn't cared about in weeks. I glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m. Ava stepped in, her heels loud against the hardwood floor as she kicked them off by the door. Her hair was messy, her clothes disheveled, like she hadn't slept in days. She was still wearing the same clothes from earlier that week, the same exhausted look in her eyes. I didn't say anything right away, just watched her as she dropped her purse onto the counter with a heavy thud, clearly not expecting to see me still awake. She looked at me, her eyes wild, tired, and something else. Desperation, or maybe defeat. It was hard to tell, but she couldn't hide the anger that was simmering just beneath the surface. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight, barely above a whisper. I didn't get up, didn't react. I just stayed seated, giving her the space to speak. I set my wine glass down carefully and gave her a look, the kind of look that made it clear I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I'm listening. Ava walked into the kitchen, hands running through her hair as if trying to figure out where to start. You filed the paperwork, huh? She muttered, pacing for a moment. You're serious about this? I am, I said simply, not missing a beat. There was no hesitation in my voice. I wasn't going to back down now. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. You're going to do this to me? You're going to throw me out? After everything I've done for you? I shook my head, calmly. I'm not throwing you out. You have options, Ava. You've always had options. You could have paid rent like any other adult, but you chose not to. That's on you. Ava's lips trembled for a moment. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. The anger in her eyes was replaced by something vulnerable. I almost didn't recognize her at that moment. Her voice faltered, softer now. I don't have anywhere else to go, Quinn. I don't. I stared at her, my eyes steady. That's not my problem anymore. I've done enough. You've been living off me for 3 years, and I'm not doing it anymore. You're capable of standing on your own. It's time for you to do that. Her face twisted with frustration. You think I don't know that? You think I don't know what I've been doing? Her voice cracked a little, but she quickly composed herself. I messed up. I know I did. But I didn't mean it. I never meant for it to get this far. It was just easier, you know? I was struggling, and you were always there. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears, but they slipped through anyway. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to make it right. I stood up slowly, taking a step toward her. You never had to make it right, Ava. I've always let you get away with it. But that's over now. You've been using me, and I've let it happen. And I'm not sorry for standing up for myself anymore. I've given you every chance to change, but you didn't take it. She swallowed hard, staring at me. There was a long silence between us, thick with everything that had gone unsaid for the past 3 years. Then she finally broke. I'm sorry, Quinn, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. I am. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that the damage was done, but another part of me, a small, quiet part, felt the weight of her apology. She wasn't the same girl who'd laughed behind my back. She wasn't the same smug, entitled sister who took everything I gave her without a second thought. She was different now, broken in a way that maybe, just maybe, could allow her to see what she had done. Maybe this is what you needed, I said softly. Maybe you had to face this. You've been running away from responsibility, hoping I would fix everything for you. But that's not my job anymore. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked down at the floor. I know. I've been selfish. I sighed, walking past her toward the door. I'm not doing this to hurt you, Ava. I just can't keep letting you walk all over me. I'm done. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any words could. She was finally getting it. And as much as I hated that it had to come to this, part of me knew it was the only way. By the time I walked back into the living room, I could hear the soft sounds of her packing, clothes rustling, drawers opening and closing. She was getting ready to leave. It was strange, but I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't angry. I wasn't elated. I was just done. This was the end of the chapter, the end of me being her safety net, and maybe, just maybe, the start of her learning how to stand on her own. I sat back down on the couch, the weight in my chest finally lifting. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was real, and it felt like I had my life back. The next morning, I woke up to the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway and the faint creak of the floorboards. It was too early for Ava to be back, wasn't it? I had expected more drama, more resistance, but the house was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. I glanced at the clock. It was barely 7 a.m., and there was no sign of Ava. I thought back to the night before. Her quiet apology, her tearful realization. It wasn't enough to erase everything she'd put me through, but it was a start. Maybe. She was leaving, that was clear. She didn't want to face the consequences, but at least she was facing them now. She had no choice but to. I didn't expect her to be gone so soon. When I stepped into the kitchen to grab my coffee, I was surprised to see the empty countertop, the absence of the clutter she always left behind, the cereal boxes, the dirty mugs. Even her shoes were gone, no more discarded sandals by the door. There was a note on the counter, folded neatly. I reached for it, hesitant, but opened it anyway. "Quinn, I'm sorry for everything. I never realized what I was doing to you. I can't say enough how much I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't keep living like this. I need to figure things out on my own. Thank you for everything, and I hope someday you'll forgive me. Ava!" I stared at the note for a long time, reading it over and over, letting the words sink in. She was gone. There was no dramatic exit, no confrontation, just silence. The house felt even emptier now that she had left, but it was different, peaceful, in a way I hadn't felt in years. I folded the note and set it down on the counter, my mind racing. She was gone. That was it. I didn't need to carry her anymore. But there was still something lingering in my chest. Something heavier than I'd anticipated. Was I relieved? Yes. Was I angry? A little. Was I sad? Maybe, but not for the reasons I thought. I sat down at the kitchen table, the quiet stretching around me like a long overdue breath, the kind of stillness you don't realize you've been missing until it settles in. Ava had been a constant presence in my life, even when she wasn't physically there. But now, the silence was mine, and it felt different. I didn't know if Ava would figure things out or if she would ever understand the toll she had taken on me. But I had done my part. I had given her the space to grow, to stand on her own, even if it wasn't how I expected it to happen. I'd set the boundary. I'd done the hard thing. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, I was greeted by Uncle Jack, his usual easy smile on his face. "How's everything going?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Quiet," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Too quiet, but I think I'm okay with that." He gave me a knowing look. "I bet you are. Looks like you made the right call, huh?" I nodded, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, I think so. It wasn't easy, but it needed to happen." He studied me for a moment, his gaze soft but steady. "It's never easy, Quinn, especially when it's family. But you've got to take care of yourself too. Sometimes that means making the hard choices." I let his words settle in. It was the first time I realized how much I had been holding on to, how much I had been carrying for Ava without even realizing it. It wasn't just about the rent or the bills. It was about her taking me for granted, using me as a crutch when I should have been asking her to stand on her own 2 feet. "I just feel weird about it," I admitted, my voice softer now. Like, am I a terrible person for feeling relieved? For feeling like I'm finally free? Uncle Jack smiled, giving me a gentle shrug. "Not at all. You did what you needed to do, and you're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling. Relief, guilt, anger, it's all part of it. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be true to yourself." I nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until it was gone. Ava had taken so much, and I had let her. I had given her everything I could, my home, my time, my resources, but she had never given anything back. Not in the way I needed. And now, for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive me," I said quietly, almost to myself. Uncle Jack's smile softened. "She will, eventually. But even if she doesn't, you've done the right thing. You've given her the chance to grow up. The rest is up to her." I nodded again, feeling the weight slowly lift off my shoulders. There was still a part of me that worried, that wondered if I had done the right thing, but deep down, I knew I had. I couldn't keep being her safety net. I couldn't keep enabling her to avoid the consequences of her actions. Thanks, Uncle Jack, I said, offering him a small but genuine smile. I needed to hear that. He patted me on the back as he walked toward the door. Anytime, kid. You did well. Just remember, you've got to take care of yourself too. As he left, I closed the door behind him and turned back to the quiet house. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life. The last few years had been a blur of frustration and resentment, but now it was different. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. It was a kind of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. Freedom. Ava was out there, figuring things out on her own, and I was here. Finally, free from the weight of it all. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, the world moving on just as it always had. I didn't know what the future held for me or Ava, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was going to be okay. I was done playing the fool, and for once, that felt like enough. Through this experience, I learned that sometimes love isn't about giving everything you have or sacrificing your well-being for someone else. It's about knowing when to set boundaries and recognizing that enabling someone's bad behavior doesn't help them in the long run. It only hurts both of you. I realized that I had been so focused on being the good sister that I forgot to be good to myself. Strength isn't always about fighting for someone. It's knowing when to walk away and let them stand on their own. In the end, I learned that taking care of myself was the most important thing I could do. What would you do if, on your 18th birthday, everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie? I thought I had it all figured out. A birthday cake, presents, maybe a little awkward family gathering, standard stuff. But nothing about that day was standard. My mom baked a cake, vanilla, not her style. She never cooked, not even on holidays, but that morning, she did. Looking back, I should have known something was off, but I didn't. I was still in my pajamas, the kind you wear when the world feels like it can wait. That was before Dad called me into the living room. He didn't even look at me when I sat down. His eyes were cold, like he'd just stepped out of a meeting, a place where emotions didn't exist. Mom, on the other hand, stared down at her lap, her lips tight, as if she could keep the world from falling apart by not saying anything. The silence hung there, heavy. Then it happened. "You were adopted," Mom said flatly, like she was reading a memo, not revealing the most important thing in my life. "We took you in when you were 2. Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We did what we could." Frozen. My heart, like it was made of glass, cracked open with no warning. It wasn't anger, not yet, but something darker, sharper. They weren't just telling me the truth. They were handing me a map, pointing me to a life I didn't recognize. A life where everything I believed about who I was, who they were, was a lie. They had waited for me to turn 18. And I guess the truth had a shelf life. "We think it's time you find your way now," Mom continued, her voice lacking any warmth, any trace of affection. "You're old enough." Dad slid a small duffel bag across the carpet. It looked cheap, the kind you get at a discount store. Inside, there were some clothes, a few wrinkled bills, and money, I guess. Not enough to change my life, but enough to change everything I thought I knew about it. "Somewhere to stay," Dad added. "We've arranged for you to be at a hostel until you find a job." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I'd learned early not to show emotions around them. It only made things worse. I nodded, a smile so small it could have been mistaken for a twitch, and stood up, fingers gripping the strap of the bag. They didn't notice. They never noticed how my heart beat faster, how the blood pounded in my ears. They didn't know I'd already discovered the truth weeks ago. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found a letter buried in the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet. An envelope addressed to a woman named Elena Vasquez. It was tucked behind old tax papers, the kind of thing you never want to sort through. I hadn't opened it right away, but when I did, the birth certificate was there, the one with my name, and Elena's, listed as my mother, no father. I'd looked her up. I'd gone to the library to dig through old newspapers, hoping to find some piece of her that would tell me who she was. And what I found shook me to my core. Elena wasn't an unfit mother. She wasn't irresponsible. She'd been taken away. They'd made her disappear. And now, as I walked out the front door of the house I'd lived in for the last 18 years, it wasn't abandonment I felt. It was resolved. I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving with a plan. The hostel smelled like bleach and stale air, the kind of place you end up when you've run out of options and you don't have a choice but to settle for something that barely resembles a home. I kept my back pressed against the wall that first night, clutching the duffel bag as if it held something more valuable than clothes and a few crumpled bills. The bed was uncomfortable, the sheets too thin for the chill in the room. But I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care. I was alone, completely. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I left the hostel. My stomach was tight with hunger, but I couldn't wait to sit around any longer. I had to know the truth. There was no time to waste. I walked to the public library, the only place that had ever felt safe to me. It was quiet, comforting, and, most importantly, free. I found my way to the microfilm station, a tiny corner of the library that felt like a relic from another time. I slid in the reel I'd hidden in the locker the week before, the one with the article about Elena's past. There she was. Her name, Elena Vasquez, is across the headline in bold print. Local psychiatrist institutionalized after whistleblower claims backfire. The photo beside it was faded, but there she was, dark eyes and delicate features, looking out from the page as she was led away in handcuffs. Her expression wasn't one of fear. It was defiance. And that made my heart ache. I read the article over and over, as if the words might change, might suddenly give me a clue that would explain everything. But they didn't. Dr. Richard Halverson, a local doctor, was accused of abusing and experimenting on female patients. Elena had been the one to blow the whistle, and for that, she had been silenced. A month later, she was declared unstable and sent to Silver Birch Psychiatric Facility. No charges were ever filed against Halverson, no follow-up, just silence. But I knew better. Nothing was ever truly silent. I printed the article. I tucked it into the envelope with the birth certificate, the one that had changed everything for me. The librarian glanced at me as I slid the paper into the envelope, but she didn't ask any questions. Maybe she was used to people like me, people who carried secrets in their hands, people who didn't want to be noticed. Back at the hostel, I opened my notebook. I started writing down everything I knew. Elena was a practicing psychiatrist. She had tried to expose Halverson for his abuse. She gave birth to me while she was in the midst of her battle. She was then committed, labeled as mentally unstable, and disappeared. I had been placed with parents who were connected to Halverson, who had tried to cover up everything she had stood for. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it. I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows on the ceiling seemed too close, too alive. I kept thinking about Elena. Did she know I was out here? Did she even know I existed anymore? I had to find her. I had to see her. But first, I had to find Silver Birch. I had to know where she had been kept. The next morning, I started calling every public records office I could find. The mental health departments, the state archives, anyone who might have a lead. Most didn't know or didn't care, but one clerk, an older woman with a soft voice, hesitated when I asked. "I'll call you back," she said. 2 hours later, she did. "There's a long-term care center in Glenridge, about 3 hours north of you. Some of the patients from Silver Birch were moved there quietly in the late 90s. No public list, but I can tell you some of them are still there." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She gave me the name, Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health. I wrote it down. I had a destination now, but I had no car, no money, and no idea what I would find when I got there. I stared at the wrinkled bills in my pocket. My adoptive parents' money had barely gotten me through a few days at the hostel. I had to get to Glenridge, though. I didn't care how. I didn't want to beg. I didn't want to steal. But I needed answers. I crossed the street to the diner and stood outside for a moment, hesitating. The sign in the window said, "Help Wanted." I could already feel my stomach tighten. This wasn't how I had imagined my life unfolding, not in any way. But I wasn't leaving here without knowing the truth. I pushed through the door and asked to speak to the manager. When I explained that I'd do anything, wash dishes, mop floors, anything, he looked me up and down. He saw the dark circles under my eyes and the weariness in my voice. He saw a kid who didn't belong here, but who had no other choice. "You start tomorrow at 6, he said. I worked for 5 days straight. My back ached, my and hands bled from scalding water and cracked soap. I barely spoke to anyone. But on the 6th morning, when I pocketed the $117 I'd earned, I finally had enough to catch the bus to Glen Ridge. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked to the terminal, folded the envelope with Elena's article inside my jacket, and climbed on board. The ride was quiet, passing towns that looked abandoned and streets covered in frost, even though it was already April. Ridgeview Center sat at the top of a long hill, half hidden by trees. The sign was faded, the paint peeling. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a forgotten mansion, the kind you hear about in stories but never actually believe could exist. I walked up the steps, heart pounding in my chest. There was no going back now. The woman at the front desk didn't look up when I entered. She was too busy scribbling something on her clipboard, her glasses perched low on her nose, the tired lines around her mouth speaking of a life lived in monotony. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, trying to steady my voice. I had prepared for this moment, but the weight of it still made my stomach twist. The clerk glanced at me, her eyes barely lifting before asking, "Name?" "Elena Vasquez," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She blinked slowly. "Relation?" she asked, a slight furrow in her brow. I paused. "I'm her daughter." There was a long beat of silence. Her gaze lingered on me like she was trying to decide whether or not to believe me, whether my story held any truth. Finally, she sighed and picked up the phone. She murmured something into the receiver that I couldn't quite catch, then hung up. "Second door on the left," she said, her voice flat, giving me no more than the bare minimum of information. "Keep it brief." I nodded, gripping the envelope tighter. My fingers were starting to shake, but I willed them to stay still. I couldn't afford to be weak now. I couldn't afford to be anything but strong. The hallway was long, lined with faded wallpaper and the faint smell of antiseptic. The kind of place you'd see in a movie where the walls themselves seemed to hold secrets. The door at the end was heavy, old wood, cracked at the edges, as if it had been slammed shut one too many times. I took a deep breath before I pushed it open. The room was small, and it smelled of dust and stillness. The only furniture was a single chair by the window, and that's where she sat. Elena. My mother. She didn't turn when I entered and didn't acknowledge my presence at first. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her thin frame slouched, her long hair streaked with gray. There was a quiet dignity to her, even in this place, like she was holding on to something inside herself that no one could take. "Elena," I whispered, my voice trembling before I could stop it. Her head lifted slowly, and for a moment, I thought she didn't recognize me. But then her eyes met mine, and I saw it. The flicker of something behind them, recognition, pain, maybe both. I'm your daughter," I said, stepping closer, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You had a daughter 18 years ago. They told me you were unfit and dangerous, but I read what happened. I know what they did to you." She didn't speak right away, just stared at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them dark from years of crying, or perhaps from the drugs they'd given her. She exhaled softly, like a lifetime of hurt was contained in that single breath. "They still watch me," she said quietly, almost too soft to hear, her voice trembling but firm. "They think I don't remember, but I do." I froze, stepping closer, trying to understand the weight of her words. "Who's they?" I asked, my throat tight. "Is it Halverson? My father?" Elena's eyes darted around the room, first to the door and then to the corners of the ceiling. There were no cameras that I could see, but her gaze said she knew where they used to be. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your father? He wasn't meant to adopt you. He wasn't even on the approved list. But he pulled strings, got your file closed, sealed. She looked down at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. I tried to stop it. But by then, they had already decided. I was too loud, too dangerous. My knees felt weak. I lowered myself into the chair beside her, my voice steady but shaking. What were they doing to you, Elena? What did Halverson do to those women? She bit her lip, the skin pale and cracked. Experimental therapy, isolation techniques, memory suppression trials. It started under the guise of PTSD treatments, but it evolved. She paused, her eyes squeezing shut as if the memories were too much. They tested drugs, behavioral manipulation, on women who had no one to speak for them, addicts, inconvenient wives, and me. I swallowed hard, the words punching the air from my lungs. And you? I was documenting everything, she whispered. I was young, idealistic. I thought ethics mattered. I submitted a report to the state board. A week later, I was suspended, then arrested. Then they sent me here. Her voice cracked and she exhaled sharply. They told me you had been placed somewhere safe. I didn't know where. I didn't know what happened to you. I reached into my bag, pulling out the envelope that held the article from the library. You don't have to wonder anymore, I said softly. I found out. Everything. I'm not going to let them keep you here. Her hands shook as she reached for the folded paper, but when her fingers brushed it, she froze. You shouldn't be here, she said in a strained whisper. If they know you found me... I don't care, I interrupted, firmer now. You're not crazy, you never were, and I'm going to prove it. Elena's hand shot out suddenly, gripping mine with surprising force. Don't trust anyone with a badge or a lab coat, she warned, her eyes wide with fear. Not in this world. Before I could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Her body stiffened immediately, as though every muscle knew what was coming. The door opened and a nurse, whom I'd never seen before, stepped inside. She smiled thinly, as though she had rehearsed the expression. I'm sorry, visiting hours are over, she said, cutting through the tension like a knife. But as she stood there, about to close the door, she leaned in slightly and whispered, You're not the first to come asking about her. But the last girl didn't come back. The door clicked shut behind me before I could respond, and the words hung in the air like a warning. I stood there, heart racing, mind spinning. Elena wasn't just a patient here, she was a prisoner. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside Ridgeview. My breath fogged in the frigid air, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my body. But it wasn't just the chill that made my fingers tremble. It was everything I had just learned. Elena wasn't just another patient. She wasn't just a woman who had been forgotten. She was a casualty of a system built on lies, manipulation, and power. And I was starting to realize that the people responsible weren't just going to let the truth slip out quietly. I didn't go straight to the bus station. Instead, I found a bench under a dead oak tree, the skeletal branches twisting against the pale sky. I sat there for a long time, my thoughts a whirlpool of fear, anger, and resolve. I knew I had to get out of this town and get away from Ridgeview, but I wasn't running. Not yet. I needed more. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone and started searching as if the answers would magically appear on the screen. I combed through forums, news archives, and anything I could find that would connect the dots. But the more I searched, the more I realized how carefully everything had been covered up. There was no information on Ridgeview Center, no mention of any patients who had disappeared, no mention of a girl named Claire Rothman, the journalist who had vanished. It was like they had scrubbed their history clean. I was so caught up in my search that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind until they were nearly on top of me. I spun around quickly, but it was only a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a tired expression. She was wearing a coat that had seen better days, her hands stuffed deep into the pockets. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was something else beneath it, a sense of knowing, a sense of urgency. I started, but the words caught in my throat. She glanced at me, scanning me with a practiced eye, then nodded slightly. "I've seen you around, been looking for someone." I blinked, trying to understand. "I'm looking for answers. I need to know what happened to my mother, Elena Vasquez." Her eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition passing over her face before she nodded again, more solemnly this time. "Follow me." Without another word, she turned and started walking down the street, her pace quick but steady. I hesitated, but something about her was different. Her manner, the way she held herself. I couldn't explain it, but I knew she was connected to something much bigger than I was. So I followed. She led me into a small diner, one of those old places with neon signs and cracked vinyl booths, the kind that always smelled like grease and stale coffee. It was almost empty, save for a few workers cleaning up for the night shift. She motioned for me to sit at a booth in the back, where the shadows were thick. The air between us was tense, like we both knew something was about to happen. Once we sat, she wasted no time. "I'm Rachel Ashby, former investigative reporter. I've been digging into Halverson for years. He's not just some local doctor with a shady practice. The man's untouchable. His foundation, the Halverson Wellness Foundation, it's a front for something much darker. I know what happened to your mother, and I know what they did to the others." I blinked, trying to absorb her words. What are you saying?" She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Elena wasn't the first. She wasn't even the last. There's a trail of women behind her, all victims of these so-called therapies, and all erased from the record. I've been chasing this for years, but they've covered their tracks too well. The people involved, your father, Halverson, they've got influence everywhere. Media, law enforcement, and hospitals. They shut down anyone who gets too close." I could barely breathe. "What do you want from me?" Rachel's eyes met mine, hard and unflinching. "I want you to help me expose them. You've got the missing piece, the proof. Elena's story is only one piece of the puzzle. Your father, Thomas Bennett, he's part of it. He helped them cover it all up. And you, Lily, you're the only one who can make this whole thing come crashing down." I stared at her for a long moment. The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was asking me to risk everything, my safety, my life, my sanity. But there was no going back now. I'd already uncovered too much, and the only way forward was to make sure the world knew what had happened to my mother, to the others, and to me. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. Rachel nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Good, but we can't do this alone. We need to get the evidence out. The documents, the files, everything you've got. It's not enough to just tell people. We need to show them, and we need to move fast. Halverson's foundation has eyes everywhere. If they know we're on their tail, they'll do anything to stop us." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Where do we start?" Rachel leaned back in her seat, pulling out a well-worn laptop from her bag. She flipped it open and started typing, her fingers moving quickly across the keys. "We get this to the right people. We send it everywhere. Whistleblower networks, underground forums, journalists who aren't afraid to go after the truth. We make it too big for them to contain. Once it's out there, they can't stop it." I watched as she began transferring files from a flash drive onto the laptop. A sense of urgency filled the air, a feeling that we were walking a razor's edge. One wrong move and everything could come crashing down. But there was no turning back. Not now. Not after everything I'd learned. Rachel closed the laptop with a decisive snap and looked up at me. "This is just the beginning, but it's the only way forward. You ready?" I nodded, my heart pounding. I was ready. But what we were about to do, it was going to change everything, and I wasn't scared anymore. The next few days felt like a blur, almost like everything was moving too fast for me to keep up. But I was no longer the naive girl who didn't know where she belonged. I had a mission now. Every waking moment was consumed with making sure the truth came to light. Rachel and I worked non-stop, sending files, copying evidence, and reaching out to everyone we could think of, whistleblower networks, investigative journalists, and anyone who had a reputation for going after powerful people. But even then, it felt like we were just scratching the surface. The Halverson Foundation had too many fingers and too many pies. One afternoon, Rachel received a text from a journalist she'd worked with before. "It's big. It's everywhere. You've got to come see this," it said. The moment I saw her face, tight with urgency, eyes flashing with a fire that hadn't been there before. I knew. I couldn't breathe as she clicked on the news feed. The headline was the first thing that hit me. Whistleblower uncovers decades of unethical psychiatric practices. The Halverson Foundation under investigation. Then came the rest. The media storm that followed. Articles, podcasts, Twitter threads. Videos of Elena, her voice slurred, eyes vacant, sitting in that chair during those so-called therapy sessions. The world was starting to listen. "Is this it?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Is this real?" Rachel nodded. "It's bigger than we thought. The evidence we sent, combined with the testimonies from the victims, it's enough to get an investigation started. The Attorney General's office is already involved. This is just the beginning. But they won't stop." I felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. The truth was out. But what would happen next? Would they come after me? After Elena? What was the cost of exposing the powerful? Then came the phone call I was both dreading and expecting. Thomas Bennett. I didn't even need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. His voice, smooth and controlled, carried through the phone. "Lily," he said, the way he said my name like it was something he could control. "We need to talk, in person." "I have nothing to say to you," I replied, my voice stronger than I thought it would be. "You should," he said, his voice almost soothing. "Everything you've found, every document you've uncovered, it's dangerous for you, Lily. It's dangerous for all of us. I've already tried to be patient. But this could destroy everything." My heart raced, but I didn't flinch. "You're right. It will destroy everything. Everything you've built, everything you've hidden. But it's time for the world to know the truth. And I'm not stopping now." He sighed, as though disappointed by my response, but not surprised. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "You still have time. You don't have to do this." I clenched my jaw, staring at the wall. I could hear the weight of his words, but there was no going back now. "It's already out. I'm done listening to you." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard before, he said, "This won't end well for you, Lily. You're not as untouchable as you think." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, a strange calmness washing over me. There were no more threats left to make. It was done. I'd exposed him, exposed all of them. That night, Rachel and I made a plan. We knew the Foundation would fight back, maybe harder than we were prepared for. They had power, connections, and influence. But we were ready. We couldn't stop now, not with so many lives on the line. The news was everywhere. By the next morning, social media was ablaze. The stories were coming in faster than we could keep track. Survivors of the psychiatric experiments and victims of Halverson's so-called treatments are all speaking out, some for the first time in years. And it wasn't just Elena's voice anymore. It was everyone's. But we weren't finished yet. There was still Elena. Still, Claire Rothman, the journalist who had disappeared. "Let's go," Rachel said, grabbing her coat as we stood up. "We're not done yet. We've got one last thing to do." Hours later, we stood in front of Ridgeview Center. The place still looked like a forgotten mansion, decaying at the edges, but it had a new meaning now. It wasn't just the home to the lost souls it held, it was the site of a revolution. Elena had been freed, and now we were there to take her back, to get her to safety once and for all. Nurse Janet was waiting for us at the door, her expression taut with the weight of everything that had happened. She handed me a clipboard with some papers, but there was something else in her eyes, something deeper. "Elena's been sedated, but she's lucid," she said quietly. "You need to move quickly. They'll notice soon." I nodded. "Thank you. We're taking her now." We made our way down the corridor. The lights flickered above us, casting long shadows across the peeling walls. When we reached Elena's room, the door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open slowly. She was sitting by the window just like the first time I saw her. Her eyes were glassy, but there was still a flicker of recognition when she turned her head toward me. "Mom," I whispered, kneeling beside her, We're leaving. We're going home. She didn't speak, but her hand moved slowly, reaching for mine. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against my cheek, and for the first time, I saw something close to peace in her eyes. "I found you," I said, my voice breaking. "I always would." We left the room quietly with no alarm and no men in white coats. Just the fading light of the day and the wind that carried us into the unknown. The weeks that followed were a blur. The trial was postponed, delayed, but not dismissed. The media coverage surged. The truth spread like wildfire. And slowly, Thomas Bennett and his allies started to unravel. He was indicted 3 months later. The foundation that had built its empire on secrecy and lies was being torn down piece by piece. But the fight wasn't over. 6 months later, I met Claire Rothman. She was alive. Hidden away in a small town in Oregon, living under a false name, cautious and guarded, but still alive. The same journalist who had gone missing after digging too deep into Halverson's past. We sat for hours, not talking about the things we had lost, but about the future we were going to build. Together. And together, we would ensure that the truth never went back into the darkness. The world had changed, and with it, I had changed. We had torn down a system that had buried so many lives, including my own. But even as the public outcry reached a fever pitch, I couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. The truth was no longer something to uncover. It was something to carry, something to protect. And the battle wasn't over. It would never be truly over until everyone who had been part of the corruption was held accountable. The story of what happened to Elena, to the women who had been manipulated and mistreated, and to me would not fade away. We made sure of that. The evidence was everywhere now. The articles, the interviews, the podcasts, the videos, they were permanent. But what mattered more was what came next. What would the world do with the truth once it had been handed to them? Rachel and I continued to work together, moving in the shadows, making sure the leaks kept coming, making sure the pressure never relented. We found allies, journalists who weren't afraid to speak out, lawyers who weren't afraid to go up against the system, even former prosecutors who had been silenced but were now ready to speak. The walls that had once stood between us and the truth were crumbling, but there was always someone waiting to rebuild them, someone trying to bury it all again. As for Thomas Bennett, he faded from the public eye. The man who had once stood at the top of it all was now a shadow of the person he'd once been. I couldn't bring myself to feel any satisfaction in that. He had taken so much from so many people, and the wreckage he had left behind was a reminder that even the most powerful could fall. But it wasn't enough. Not for Elena, not for the other women, not for me. In the months that followed, I checked in on Elena regularly. It wasn't easy. The process of reintegrating her into the world was slow and painful. She had spent so many years in that place, her mind dulled by the drugs, the isolation, and the trauma. But she was still there, still fighting, still trying to remember who she had been before they stole her life. Every day she fought to rebuild herself, and every day I watched her do it, with a kind of strength I could never have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit beside her in the small, quiet apartment we had moved into, just the two of us. I would tell her about the world outside, the world we were rebuilding, and the people who were finally starting to listen. I'd tell her about Claire, who was recovering too, who was beginning to believe in the future again. I think, for the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to believe in that future too. She didn't speak much, but when she did, I saw the flicker of the woman she had once been, the strong, defiant woman who had refused to let Halverson destroy her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was alone anymore. We were both rebuilding together. But it wasn't just the personal victories that mattered now. There were still the other voices, the other victims whose stories hadn't been fully told yet. So I kept pushing. Rachel and I kept digging, finding more survivors, connecting them with lawyers, and making sure their voices were heard. The Halverson Foundation was collapsing, and in its place, we were building something new. A network, a movement, a way for women who had been silenced to finally speak. And that movement grew. Slowly, but surely, it grew. One day, as I was sorting through some old files, a name stood out: Claire Rothman. The same Claire who had disappeared all those years ago. We had found her, and she was alive. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, but now her name appeared in a message. She was ready. We had talked about it before, how to handle the aftermath. There were risks, but it was time to go public, to reclaim what had been taken. It wasn't just about exposing Halverson anymore. It was about ensuring that nothing like this would ever happen again. The world needed to know, needed to hear from the people who had fought through the silence. We met in a quiet cafe just outside the city, far from the prying eyes that were always lurking now. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She was older and more guarded, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She'd survived. She'd made it. And now, she was ready to speak. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said, sitting across from me and pushing a stack of papers toward me. "But here we are." I smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. Here we are. The media storm that followed was like nothing I had ever imagined. The interviews, the documentaries, the articles, all of it seemed to happen at once, a whirlwind of truth spinning out of control. We were no longer the underdogs. The truth was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was loud. It was undeniable. But there was one thing I knew for certain. It wasn't over. Not yet. As the months wore on and more people came forward, the Foundation's once immense power began to erode. It wasn't just Halverson. It wasn't just Bennett. It was everyone who had ever helped them. Everyone who had profited from silencing women, from using their bodies and their minds for their gain. And slowly, the world began to reckon with what had happened. But even as the world changed around us, I knew that for me and Elena, the battle would always be personal. It wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about reclaiming our lives. And together, we would never stop fighting for that.